I climb mountains, if the mountains are where you hide. Oh, how far I'd scale the valleys if you'd grace the other side. Oh, how long have I chased rivers from lonely seas to where they rise, against the rush of grace descending from the source of its supply. 'Cause in the highlands and the heartache, you're neither more or less inclined. I would search and stop at nothing, but you're just not that hard to find. Oh, I'll praise you on the mountain, I'll praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No, there's God within the shadow, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is, in the highlands and the heartache all the same. Oh, 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 how far beneath your glory does your kindness extend its path, from where your feet rest on the sunrise to where you sweep the sinner's past. Oh, how fast would you come running if just a shadow me through the night? Trace my steps through all my failures and walk me out the other side. Oh, who could dare ascend that mountain, that valley you called Calvary? But for the one I call Good Shepherd, who like a lamb was slain for me. Oh, I'll praise you on the mountain, I'll praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No, there's God within the shadow, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is, in the highlands and the heartache all the same. Oh, oh, yeah. Whatever I walk through, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing to the shadows my song of ascent. Whatever I walk through, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing to the shadows my song of ascent, my song of ascent. Oh, 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 yeah, my song of ascent. Oh, oh, from the greatest of all valleys come the pastures we call grace, a mighty river flowing upward from a deep but empty grave.
Hi everybody, it's good to be back with you at Fireside. I don't know about you, but I've been doing some spring cleaning not a whole lot, but a little bit. And when I've dug through some things, I've found some things really from a long time ago. And one of the things I rediscovered, was my lunchbox. The lunchbox I used as a little kid, actually in kindergarten. Here's my lunchbox. I have it. What do you think? It's the Muppets. Take a look. My kids saw it and they said, wow, Mom, that is vintage. It's true. It's a metal lunchbox, and you can open the lunchbox. And my mom, if I can open it, wrote my name in it. There I am. See? My street, my room. Then my sister crossed it out, and she wrote her name in. Anyway, it's a Muppet lunchbox. I grew up watching the Muppet Show. And a few years ago, actually, there was a Muppet movie in 2011, I think it was, Amy Adams and Jason Segel. Did anybody see it? It's a pretty good movie, the Muppet movie. And in that movie, Kermit here, he wanted to get the gang back because they had all dispersed into different locations, and they were doing different things, and the Muppets were no longer an entity. They were separated. So Kermit wanted to get them back, and of course he had to find them, track everybody down. And let's see, Fozzie Bear, he was doing stand-up in Reno. Rolf, remember he played the piano. He was playing piano in some smoky bar. Miss Piggy, she was doing pretty well. She was in France. She was in Paris and working for a fashion magazine. And Gonzo, he was doing pretty well too. He owned a plumbing company, and he sold toilets and plumbing equipment. So he was doing great. But he still had to bring back one more person, and that was Animal. And it was a little bit tricky getting Animal back because Animal was enrolled in an anger management program. And of course, the movie's pretty funny there when they try to get Animal back with Jack Black as his counselor. But Animal, we discover, has a trigger word. And anytime this word is said, he just goes ballistic. He completely loses it. So you're not allowed to say this trigger word around Animal. Can you guess what his trigger word is? I bet you can. It's drums. There's Animal. Remember Animal? Drums. So whenever the word drums is said, he completely loses it. It's his trigger word. I wonder if you have a trigger word, or if anybody you know has a trigger word. Maybe it's Trump or Biden. But it's the kind of word that if you say around a dinner table, or think even Thanksgiving dinner, you know somebody's going to lose it. So you have a conversation beforehand. Remember, don't bring up, don't say this, don't talk about this. It's a trigger word. It's something that if it's said, someone's going to leave mad or sad. Maybe it's a word, it's a name of a person. And if you bring up his name, they're going to leave the table angry. Maybe the name of this person is on everybody's mind, but on nobody's lips. Because you know what'll happen if you say this word. Well, in our passage for today, we're in Acts chapter 23. Paul, the name Paul, it's a trigger word for a lot of people. We meet Paul after his third missionary journey, and he is headed back to Jerusalem. He is in the temple area, and just his name conjures up feelings and really intense emotions, especially among the religious elite. And things get so heated when Paul returns that he has to be brought into custody, into Roman custody, into the barracks, the temple barracks, just to keep him safe from the religious people of that day. Because the word Paul, it was a trigger word. And not only was the word Paul a trigger word, Paul used trigger words when he spoke. He said things like Gentile and resurrection, and those words would upset different groups of people. So much so that in the end, they wanted to kill him. It's a trigger word. And somebody needed to step in to save Paul. Unless somebody intervened, Paul was going to die. He wasn't going to make it. Somebody needed to step in. I'm wondering if somebody has ever needed to step into your life to save you from something. Maybe it's going down the wrong path, making a decision that you really shouldn't make, doing something that might alter your life of your families. Has anybody ever had to step in, intervene, and help to save you? Well, in Paul's case, his name, what he talked about, such a trigger word that it triggered violence. And somebody needed to step in to save him. So let's take a look at Acts chapter 23. We're going to pick it up a little early, 23 verses 9. And we'll take it through verse 23. So Acts 23, 9 to 23. There was a great uproar, and some of the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, so this is all happening on temple precincts, stood up and argued vigorously. "We find nothing wrong with this man," they said. "What if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him?" The dispute became so violent that the commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them. He ordered the troops to go down and take him away from them by force and bring him into the barracks. The following night, the Lord stood near Paul and said, this is the risen Lord, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." The next morning, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves with an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. More than 40 men were involved in this plot. They went to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have taken a solemn oath not to eat anything until we have killed Paul. Now then, you and the Sanhedrin petition the commander to bring him before you on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about his case. We are ready to kill him before he gets here." But when the son of Paul's sister heard of this plot, he went into the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." So he took him to the commander. The centurion said, "Paul, the prisoner, sent for me and asked me to bring this young man to you because he has something to tell you." The commander took the young man by the hand, drew him aside, and asked, "What is it you want to tell me?" He said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul before the Sanhedrin tomorrow on the pretext of wanting more accurate information about him. Don't give in to them, because more than 40 of them wait in ambush for him. They have taken an oath not to eat or drink until they have killed him. They are ready now, waiting for your consent to their request." The commander dismissed the young man and cautioned him, "Don't tell anyone that you have repeated this to me." Then he called 2 of the centurions and ordered them, "Get ready a detachment of 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at 9 tonight. Provide mounts for Paul so that he may be taken safely to Governor Felix." So there we have it. I mean, Paul is in a dangerous situation. If somebody doesn't intervene, if somebody doesn't step in to save him, then he's going to be killed. There are 40 men waiting in ambush for him, just waiting to assassinate him. Has anybody ever stepped in to intervene for you? Has anybody ever jumped in to help you? In this case, we see that Paul's nephew plays a major role in intervening for Paul, in saving him. And of course you think, well, of course, that's what family does, right? Family, they should be the first people to step in and help. But maybe in this case, well, it's not as clear. You see, this is Paul's nephew. And we don't know much about Paul's nephew. This is his sister's son. But it is likely that Paul was not accepted by much of his family. You see, he left the faith. He walked out on the faith. He was going places in the faith, in the Jewish faith. But Paul turned his back on all of it. In Philippians 3, chapter 3, verse 8, if you take a look at that, you'll see that Paul talks about losing everything for the sake of the gospel. Many scholars think that when Paul says that, he really is referring to his life back at home, that he lost everything. Those social connections that he had, those family connections that he once had, that people turned their backs on him. And he went all out for Jesus Christ. So you can imagine back at home in Tarsus, where Paul was born, maybe his name was a trigger word in his own house. You can imagine Paul's father, don't bring him up. I don't want to hear his name. Not here around this table. Don't talk about him. He walked out. He left the faith. He turned his back. Don't mention his name. Paul and his own family, that name could have been a trigger word that just set them off. So is it clear, is it obvious that Paul's nephew would step in and help him? Not so much. But for some reason he does. It just so happens that Paul's nephew is also in Jerusalem. It just so happens that he hears of this plot and something is triggered in his own mind. Instead of recoiling when he hears Paul's name, his nephew reaches out and he tells Paul of this plan. Sometimes it takes the will of one person to step and save us, to step in and save us, to step in and intervene. One person who has the courage to come alongside of us and to say what needs to be said, to do what needs to be done. It's the will of one person. But it's not just Paul's nephew who steps in to help to save Paul, but it's Rome. It's this one person, the will of one, but it is the might of many. I mean, we've got Rome behind this, the power of Rome. We've got, 200 spearmen, and we've got horsemen, and we've got foot soldiers, 200 soldiers. We've got 470 soldiers coming out to help save Paul in the middle of the night. Well, late at night. They come to rescue him, and they're going to take him far away. They're going to take him north to Caesarea to save him. So you've got the will of one, but you've got the might of many. You've got Rome all coming out, and they're all playing a role under the cover of darkness. I mean, it sounds like a plot ripped out of a Hollywood screenplay. I can't help but think of the stories of Lincoln. When Lincoln became president, he had to move from Chicago to D.C., but the Baltimore plot was uncovered, the plan to assassinate Lincoln. So instead of coming in great fanfare as, woohoo, president, he came in late at night by train in disguise. I do wonder how you disguise Abraham Lincoln, but in any event. So these things happen, and here we've got Paul, this assassination plot. He's got to be saved. If he doesn't, he is going to be killed. But we've got his nephew who comes in and plays a role. We've got Rome who comes in and plays a role. We've got the will of one and the might of many, all coming together to help save Paul. But is that it? Well, of course, God is not mentioned, but he's very, very active in saving Paul. You see, God oversees it all. God provides the one. God provides the many to save us when we need saving. Have you experienced that in your life? I mean, have you seen God at work using maybe one person who comes alongside you, or maybe a group of people? Maybe it's the guys at the gym, or the women in the moms group, or at the office, who come alongside you to help you, to really save you. When you are so down, or so low, or so confused, or you don't know what to do next, or where to turn next. But God uses these people. He can use the will of one person to speak that truth, to nudge you, to put an arm around you. He can use the might of many coming alongside you and pushing you where you need to be. Has God ever done that in your life? He is very present in this story. Although we don't see his name, he is actively involved in getting Paul the help that he needs. And it's so interesting because God uses the will of one and the might of many to save Paul from this assassination plot, right? He saves him. But then God uses that assassination attempt to get Paul where he needs to be. You see what's going on here? There's something terrible about to happen. I mean, we've got a guy who's going to be killed by a group of people. That's bad. God puts a stop to that, but yet God uses that very thing, scary and frightening and horrific, to bring Paul to a new place where he needs to be. And I wonder if that ever happens in our lives. If there's something that happens that's bad or scary or terrible or horrific, and God can use that to bring us where we need to be. He doesn't give it to us, but he can use it. He can repurpose it. He can fashion it for his good purposes, for his glory, for his design. So God uses this assassination plot to bring Paul where he needs to be. He's getting closer to where he needs to be. Remember what Paul said the night before all of this took place? Or what Jesus said to Paul. The risen Lord visits Paul in prison, right? And the risen Lord in verse 11 says, "Take courage. As you have testified about me in Jerusalem, you must also testify in Rome." You see, God is getting Paul closer to Rome, to his true destination. That's where Paul is supposed to be. And God is moving him closer. And it's true that sometimes God takes the messy, he takes the bad, he takes the ugly, and he can use that to bring us where we need to be. I can't help but think of a story in the book, The Horse and His Boy, C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia. And in this book, Lewis describes a scene in which Aslan, the great lion, is near to the boy Shasta. If you remember the story, Shasta, of course, is living in a magical world. He does not know all of the magic, but he's living in a difficult home environment. He doesn't know his true parents. He's raised by the fisherman, who he calls quite stern. Shasta overhears that the fisherman is going to sell him into slavery, or that's what he overhears, or what he thinks he hears. So Shasta runs away. He steals a horse, and he meets up with a young woman about his age, Aravis, and she has a horse too. Of course, both of these horses talk, because this is C.S. Lewis. And they embark on this journey. And in this journey, things are tough. They're tired, they're hungry, they're thirsty, they desperately need water. Sometimes they don't know where they're going, how they're going to get there. They have the threat of weather, they have the threat of wild animals, they have the threat of enemies chasing them down. And at one point, Shasta is on the edge of a precipice in thick fog. He can barely see his hand in front of him, but he feels breath, hot breath near him. Can you imagine that? and he's nervous. And he says, or the breath begins to speak. And the breath says, tell me your sorrows. So Shasta begins to tell his story of sorrows. And he says, he tells how he had never known his real father or mother. He tells of how he had been brought up sternly by the fishermen. He tells the story of his escape and how they were chased by lions, how he was forced to swim for his life. He told of all their dangers in Tashbaan and about the night he spent among the tombs and how the beasts howled at him out in the desert. He was scared. He told about the heat and the thirst of their desert journey and how they were almost at their goal when another lion chased them and wounded Aravis, and also how very long it had been since he had had something to eat. And this large voice speaks and says, I do not call you unfortunate. And Shasta says, don't you think it was unfortunate to meet so many lions? And the voice said, there was only one lion. What? No, there were many lions, Shasta says. And the voice said, there was only one. But he was quick of foot. And then Shasta says, how do you know? And the lion says, I was that lion. And as Shasta gaped with open mouth and said nothing, the voice continued, I was the lion who forced you to join with Aravis. I was the cat who comforted you among the houses of the dead. I was the lion who drove the jackals from you while you slept. I was the lion who gave the horses new strength of fear for the last mile so that you would reach your destination in time. And I was the lion you do not remember, who pushed the boat in which you lay, a baby, a child near death, so that it came to shore where a man sat, wakeful at night, to receive you. Sometimes God is at work, bringing us where we need to be. Sometimes he is that howling at night, but we don't realize he's scaring the jackals away. Sometimes he is the cat that brings us comfort when we are in the midst of the houses of the dead. Sometimes he is that lion that scares the life out of us. We feel like this lion is chasing us down, but what it's doing is giving us new strength, the fear of strength, so that we will reach our destination on time, so that we will get where we need to be when we need to be there. All I'm saying is that God is at work. You may not see him. He may be the howling at night. He may be the cat on your lap. Maybe he's the lion that is giving you that strength of fear to get you where you need to be. But he is at work. He's at work in difficult circumstances. He was at work in Paul's life in this assassination plot. He's at work at your life. He's at work in my life too. In all kinds of ways. Sometimes we can't see him, but he is there. God is at work, and he will get us where we need to be. Sometimes he uses the will of one, sometimes he uses the might of many, and he uses everyone and everything to bring us where we need to be. He uses the good, he uses the bad, he uses the ugly, but God will get you. He will get me where we need to be. And that is good news. Well, of course, Paul's not completely where he needs to be. He needs to get to Jerusalem. Remember why? Jesus says, as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome. Jesus tells him, the night before any of this happened. Paul has no idea what's going to happen, but Jesus had met him beforehand with these words. And now Paul can think back to these words of Jesus and how Jesus had met him in the past. And he knows that God is going to get him where he needs to be. Why? So when he gets there, he can tell them about Jesus. He can tell them how God has worked in his life. And Paul, he was a storyteller. Can you imagine what he was like on this road at night with 470 Roman soldiers surrounding him, foot soldiers, spearmen, horsemen? Do you think Paul was really quiet? I can't imagine that at all. He was telling them his story. And when he got to Caesarea, could you imagine the story still? You're never going to believe how I got here. Under the cover of darkness, Rome, they sent 470, but for me, I was in the barracks. They were going to kill me. There was a plot. Oh, yeah, but Jesus, he wants me here. He told the story. And he was waiting to get to Rome. He got to Rome. He'd tell the story. Tell the story of how God had saved him. That's our story too, right? Wherever God puts us, and when we get to where we need to be, we're going to tell that story of how God saved us. My story? I was dead in my sin. But Jesus came. God sent his son, Jesus, to pay the price for my sin. That's my story. It's your story too. God can use anyone, everyone. Can use the will of one, the might of many. He can take any circumstance and use that to bring us where we need to be. And when we get there, we tell them about him. We tell them about Jesus. Gordon MacDonald told the story of Charles Barry. He was an English preacher who lived in the late 1800s. He was the pastor of the Great Plymouth Church in Brooklyn. And as he was pastor of this church, he told his congregation the story of his first pastorate. He said it was a time when he preached a very thin gospel. It was a time when he preached really no gospel at all. He didn't really know Jesus. But he remembers in this first church, there came a knock at the door. He was in his study. And clearly it was a Lancashire girl, shawl and clogs. And she was desperate and out of breath. And she said, "Are you the minister?" He said, "Yes, I'm the minister." He said, "You need to come with me now. My mother needs help." Thinking the mother was some drunk woman in need of a policeman. He said, "Go fetch a policeman." She said, No. My mother needs your help getting in. Getting in where? Into heaven. She's dying. Will you come with me? And in that night, Barry followed his little girl 1.5 miles through windy roads until he came upon her house where this mother lay dying. He sat by her side and held her hand and told her of the Jesus who came to live a good life so that we might know how to live. This woman said, "Mister, I've lived my life. I'm a sinner. Can't you tell me of somebody who can have mercy on my poor soul?" And Barry realized in those moments that he had nothing to give her. That his gospel was so thin, that his Jesus that he knew was so thin that he had to leap back to the days of his childhood when he sat on his mother's lap and heard the stories of a Jesus who saves. And then he began to tell her about this Jesus, the Jesus who came and died for her sin, who loved her, who paid the price, who has forgiven her, and who promises eternal life. That Jesus And this woman lay dying, clenching his hands, and now you're getting it. Now you're getting it. So that night, that woman was saved. And Barry left saying, I got her in. And I myself got in too. God is at work in our lives. And he is getting us where we need to be. He will use the will of one. He can use the might of many. He can use any circumstance and every circumstance, the good, the bad, the ugly, to get us where we need to be. God is at work. And when we get there, we tell them about Jesus. We tell them the story about Jesus, a Jesus who saves, a Jesus who is real, who forgives, who promises eternal life. We tell them that story. So Fireside, you have a story as a church. You have a story as individuals. God is at work in your life. He is at work in the life of your church. And he's going to use everything that happens, that has happened, to bring you where you need to be. And when you get there, you have a story to tell. God will use it. Use everything. So go and tell your story.
Found in your name the power to sing. With only a whisper, mountains shake. Jesus, our hope and strength. You made a way, unlock these chains. Here in your presence, strongholds break. Freed by the love you gave. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. There on a tree, merciful King, broken and chained for all to see. The Father laid down his Son. From darkness to light, death lost to life, heaven and earth will join and sing. Jesus has overcome. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest give it all. It's all yours. With every breath that's in my lungs, my heart cries out, to you belongs the glory. Every loss or victory, my soul will cry to only bring you glory. With every breath that's in my lungs, my heart cries out, to you belongs the glory. Through every loss or victory, my soul will rise to only bring you glory. Bring you glory. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. Yeah, you deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. With every breath that's in my lungs, my heart cries out, to you belongs the glory. Oh, the glory. Through every loss or victory, my soul will rise to only bring you glory. You glory. And we give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all. We give you the highest praise. You deserve it all. You deserve it all.